day, I'm sitting on the floor of my new apartment in Austin, watching my 2-year-old daughter stack wooden blocks on the living room rug, and I keep thinking about the night my mother-in-law stood in my kitchen and told me I had ruined her son's life. She said it so quietly, so calmly, like she was commenting on the weather. I remember looking down at my hands and thinking, she actually believes that. She genuinely, completely believes that. I want to tell you something before I start. I am not a dramatic person. I grew up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, the kind of place where people wave to each other from their driveways and leave zucchini on your porch in summer because their garden grew too much. My mom worked a front desk at a dental office for 22 years. My dad drove a delivery truck. We were not rich. We were not particularly interesting. I did my homework, I went to community college, I transferred to Ohio State, and I got a degree in accounting. Not forensic accounting, not the glamorous version, just regular, plain accounting. I got a job at a small firm in Columbus processing payroll for mid-sized businesses, and I was good at it, and I was genuinely happy. That is the entire origin story. There is nothing remarkable about where I came from, which is maybe why I didn't see what was coming. I met my husband, I'll call him my ex-husband now, and his name is not important anymore, at a work happy hour when I was 26. He was funny. That's really what I noticed first. He had this way of making every conversation feel like an inside joke you'd been let in on. He was a project manager for a construction company, dependable job, decent salary, close to his family. At the time, I thought that last part was a good sign. We dated for a year and a half before he proposed. His mother, I'll call her Patricia because that is somehow exactly what she looks like, was warm to me at first. Warm in the way that a fireplace can seem warm from across the room before you realize you've been slowly moving closer and the heat is starting to burn. She brought me a candle the first time I came for dinner. She remembered I didn't like mushrooms. She called me sweetheart and touched my arm when she talked to me. I thought she was lovely. We got married in September. Small ceremony, outdoor venue. His family took up about 2/3 of the guest list because he had aunts and cousins from everywhere, and my side was smaller. His mother cried during the vows. I thought they were happy tears. I was 28 years old, and I thought I had done everything right. The first hint that something was off came about 4 months after the wedding. It was small the way all the first hints are. We were at Sunday dinner at his parents' house. This was a standing weekly thing, non-negotiable in their family. And Patricia had made a comment about the apartment we were renting. She said, very casually, that she had been looking at some listings, that there was a lovely 2-bedroom condo about 12 minutes from their house that she thought we should consider, that she had already spoken to the realtor. I looked at my husband. He did not look at me. That was the moment. I didn't name it then, but looking back, that was the moment I should have said something. Instead, I said we would look into it, and we moved on to dessert, and Patricia smiled at me from across the table with that warm, candle-ringing smile, and I convinced myself it was just enthusiasm, that she was just excited, that she just loved her son and wanted him nearby. We did not move into that condo. We bought a house instead, on the other side of the city, and the way Patricia received that news taught me a lot. She went quiet for about 3 days. Then she came back around and started offering to help us decorate, help us organize, help us plan the housewarming. She folded back in like nothing had happened, but something had changed. The warmth was still there, but it was performing itself now. I could feel the calculation underneath it. By our first anniversary, I was pregnant. I want to be honest about how I felt in those first weeks. It was terrifying and joyful and completely overwhelming all at once. I was not sure we were ready. Our finances were tight. We had a mortgage now. My salary was solid but not extraordinary. My husband had just switched companies and was in a 90-day probationary period. I lay awake a lot. But I also felt this fierce, quiet happiness underneath all the fear, the kind that doesn't ask permission and doesn't listen to reason. I wanted that baby so much it scared me. I told my husband on a Tuesday evening after dinner. He went still for a second, and then he pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time, and I thought, okay, we are going to be okay. He cried a little. So did I. It was one of the best nights of our marriage. Patricia found out the following Saturday. We went to his parents' house for Sunday dinner, moved up a day because his father had a golf trip, and my husband told them over the pot roast. His dad pumped his fist. His sister, who had been openly skeptical of me since the wedding, gave me a hug that surprised us both. And Patricia set down her fork very slowly and looked at me. "How far along?" she asked. "About 8 weeks," I said. She nodded. She picked her fork back up. She said, "Well, we'll see." His dad was still smiling. His sister had already moved on to asking questions about names. Nobody else caught it. My husband definitely didn't catch it. But I heard it. "We'll see." Two words that didn't mean congratulations. Two words that meant she had already decided something. The next few weeks were strange. Patricia called my husband constantly. More than usual, which was already a lot. She started asking questions through him. Was I taking prenatal vitamins? Was I seeing a doctor she approved of? Had we thought about where the baby would stay when I went back to work? Not questions to me. Questions about me, routed through her son. I mentioned it to him once. He said she was just excited. He said she meant well. I let it go. At 10 weeks, I had my first real prenatal appointment, and everything looked good. Strong heartbeat. The doctor was warm and thorough, and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. I stopped at a coffee shop to get a decaf latte, a small celebration. And I called my mom from the parking lot, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing and everything, and she told me I was going to be a wonderful mother. I believed her. That night, Patricia called my husband. I was in the other room, but I could hear his end of the conversation. I heard him say, "I don't know where you heard that." I heard him say, "That doesn't make sense." I heard him go quiet for a long time. When he came back into the living room, his face had changed, and I felt my stomach drop. He sat down. He said his mother had heard something he wouldn't tell me from who, that I had been seen at a clinic 2 towns over, that she believed I had terminated the pregnancy and was lying about still being pregnant to, in her words, lock down the marriage and the house. She had apparently been building this theory for days. She had a source, unnamed, who claimed to have seen me. I stared at him for a long time. I said, "Do you believe her?" He said, "I don't know what to believe. I want you to understand what it felt like to hear that from my husband. I was 10 weeks pregnant. I had just come from a doctor's appointment where we had heard our child's heartbeat on a speaker in a small room, and I had cried from happiness. And my husband was sitting across from me saying he didn't know what to believe. I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. I pulled up the appointment summary on my phone. The app the OB's office used sent you a PDF after every visit, and I handed it to him. He read it. He said he believed me. He said he was sorry. But the sorry had a shape to it, like it cost him something to say it, like he was conceding a point in an argument rather than apologizing to his wife. I started keeping records after that, not because I am a naturally suspicious person, but because I am an accountant. I know what documentation is for. I created a folder on my laptop and I saved every appointment summary, every test result, every prescription record. I kept a running note on my phone of dates and times when Patricia called, what she said to my husband that I could hear, any incidents that felt off. I did not tell my husband I was doing this. Looking back, I should not have had to. The dinner happened at 11 weeks. Patricia called and invited us to dinner, just the four of us, her, my husband's father, my husband, and me. She said she wanted to apologize. She said she had been wrong to suggest what she'd suggested, and she wanted to clear the air. My husband was relieved. He really wanted this to be resolved. He wanted his family to be smooth and uncomplicated, and for his wife and his mother to like each other again. And I understood that desire, even as I recognized that it was making him blind. I did not want to go. I had a feeling that sat in my chest all week like a stone. I told my husband that. He said his mother had given her word. He said one dinner, that was all. I went. The food was fine. The conversation was careful. Patricia was gracious in a way that was almost theatrical, passing me things, asking about my preferences, touching my hand once when she made her apology. Her apology was polished and specific enough to sound sincere and vague enough that she had not actually admitted to anything. My husband's father told a long story about a fishing trip. I smiled and nodded and ate. Then Patricia went to get dessert and came back with chamomile tea for me. I know you can't have caffeine, she said pleasantly. I thanked her. I drank most of it. I was sick by the time we got home. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was pregnancy nausea, which had been coming and going. I took care of myself, drank water, went to bed early. By the next afternoon, I was sicker, not better, and by the evening, I called the after-hours line from my OB's office and described my symptoms. The nurse asked several questions and told me to go to the emergency room. I will not describe all of what happened at the hospital because some of it is still painful to revisit. What I will tell you is that the ER doctor took what I described seriously. She ordered tests. She kept me overnight. And the next morning, a doctor came in and told me that there were trace amounts of a compound in my blood work consistent with pennyroyal, an herbal substance that is historically used in concentrated doses to cause miscarriage. My baby survived. I want to say that before anything else. My baby survived. The heartbeat was still there in the monitor, steady and fast, and I remember closing my eyes and pressing my hand flat against my stomach and breathing. But what had been done to me was not an accident. The doctor was very clear about that. She said the level found was not consistent with accidental ingestion. She asked if I had eaten or drunk anything unusual in the past 48 hours. I told her about the tea. I called the police from my hospital bed. 2 officers came. They were polite, they were professional, and they took my statement. I showed them the folder on my laptop. I showed them the appointment records, the notes I had been keeping, the timeline I had documented. They took it seriously. I want to be honest with you. I had been afraid they wouldn't. I had been afraid they would look at a pregnant woman complaining about her mother-in-law and decide it was a domestic dispute. But the blood work was documentation they could not dismiss, and the folder I had kept for the past month gave them context they needed. My husband was in the hospital room when the officers came. He had been there all night, pale and shaken, and I had let him stay because part of me was still hoping that this specific, undeniable, documented thing would be the moment he finally saw clearly. Patricia arrived at the hospital with my sister-in-law about 20 minutes after the police left. I do not know how she found out so quickly. She walked into my room and looked at the monitor displaying my baby's heartbeat and then looked at me, and her expression was not guilt. It was assessment. She was calculating the situation. She told the nurse she was family. The nurse apparently let them in without checking. What followed was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Patricia stood in my hospital room and told my husband that I had obviously ingested something myself to try to fake a poisoning and generate sympathy. She said I was manipulative, that I had always been manipulative, that she had tried to warn him. My sister-in-law produced a printed document, an article about women who fabricate medical emergencies for attention. She read sentences from it out loud. My baby's heart monitor beeped steadily the entire time. I looked at my husband. I watched him look at his mother. I watched something flicker across his face, discomfort, confusion, a terrible wavering, and I understood in that moment, clearly and completely, that he was not going to choose me. Not because he was a bad person necessarily, but because choosing me would require him to look at his mother and know what she was, and he had been trained since childhood to never do that. It was too large an ask. He had never built the muscle for it. I said 2 things. The first was to my sister-in-law. I said, the baby's heartbeat has been on that monitor since 11 o'clock last night. Would you like me to have the nurse pull up the data? She stopped reading. The second was to my husband. I said, I have been keeping records since October. Everything. I need you to decide right now which side of this you are going to be on, because I am not going to ask you again. He looked at his mother. Then he looked at me. Then he said he needed some air and walked out of the room. He did not come back for 4 hours. When he came back, his mother was no longer there. The police had returned in the meantime and had taken Patricia in for questioning. My sister-in-law had left shortly after. A detective had come by, reviewed the documentation I had provided, and told me they were taking the case seriously. My husband sat in the chair next to my bed and held my hand and cried and said he was sorry. I held his hand. I let him cry, and I thought very carefully about the 4 hours he had been gone, about all the times in the past year I had said something is wrong and he had said she means well, and I understood that I could forgive him for being blind and I could love him for the man he was trying to be. And I could still know that this marriage was over. Those things were not contradictory. The hospital kept me for 2 more days. My OB came by and we made a plan. The pregnancy continued. My baby was safe. I moved out 6 weeks later. My mother drove up from Columbus with my aunt, and the three of us packed my things while my husband was at work. I had already consulted with a family law attorney. I already had a plan for where I would go, how I would manage financially in the short term, what the next 3 months needed to look like. I am an accountant. I make plans. This was the hardest plan I had ever made, and also the one I was most certain about. My husband called when he came home to the half-empty house. He was not angry. He was devastated, which was somehow worse. He said we could work through it. He said he had told his mother she was not welcome in our lives, that he had finally set the boundary. I believed him that he had done it. I also knew that a boundary set after this much damage was not a foundation to build anything on. I told him I was glad he'd done it. I told him it was too late. Patricia was charged with criminal poisoning. I testified at the preliminary hearing. Standing in that courtroom and reading from the notes I'd kept, watching the documentation I had quietly gathered over those weeks become evidence, there was something that I can only describe as clarifying about it. Not satisfying, not triumphant, just clear. I had not been crazy. I had not been dramatic. I had been right to document. I had been right to trust my instincts. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge to avoid trial. She received probation and a fine and mandatory counseling in the kind of public record that follows a person. My attorney made sure the civil component was addressed as well. The legal fees from everything that followed were real and painful, and I paid them, slowly over time. My daughter was born in July. I was in a rented apartment by then, 2 bedrooms, third floor, with a small balcony where I hung a string of lights and kept a rosemary plant. My mother was with me for the first 2 weeks. My aunt came for the third. My best friend from college flew in for a weekend, and we ordered Thai food and watched 3 seasons of a show neither of us had seen, and the baby slept on my chest for most of it. It was the opposite of lonely. It was the fullest I had felt in years. I went back to work at 14 weeks postpartum remote at first, then eventually back in the office part-time. My firm was understanding. I had been there long enough to have built something, to have earned goodwill, and they worked with me. I also started studying for an additional certification, not because I had a grand plan, but because I had 12 hours a week of nap time and I needed somewhere to put the energy that wasn't anxiety. That certification led to a position upgrade 18 months later. That position upgrade changed my income bracket. These things compound. That is a thing accountants understand maybe better than anyone. My ex-husband sees our daughter every other weekend and 1 weeknight a month. He is better as a father than he was as a husband, I think, because fatherhood is a role with clearer requirements, and he is genuinely trying. My daughter has his laugh and my stubbornness and her own entirely specific personality that belongs to neither of us, and watching her figure out who she is the best thing I have ever done. I do not think about Patricia very often. Occasionally, something triggers the memory, a particular smell, a chamomile tea bag in a restaurant's tea selection, the particular quiet of a hospital hallway, and I feel the old shape of it. But it has gotten smaller. Most things do, eventually, if you stop feeding them. What I think about more is the version of myself who almost didn't keep records, who almost let the first few incidents slide into the category of just being difficult, who almost convinced herself that making documentation meant being dramatic, that building evidence meant anticipating something unforgivable rather than simply protecting herself from something that was already unfolding. I think about how close I came to having nothing. If you are reading this in a situation that feels off, not obviously wrong, not dramatically terrible, just persistently, quietly off, I want to tell you that your instincts are data. They are information. You don't have to wait until you can prove something to act on what you know. Trust the stone in your chest. Keep the records. Make the plan. You do not have to be dramatic to protect yourself. You just have to be methodical. My daughter just handed me a red wooden block. She's looking at me with the specific, focused expression she gets when she has decided something is important. I take it. I place it on the structure she's building. She nods, satisfied, and goes back to work. This is what I was protecting. I would do it again exactly the same way. I keep a folder on my laptop that I have not deleted. I don't open it often, but I know it's there, and knowing it's there still means something to me. Not because of what it contains, but because of the version of myself who created it. A woman who was scared and pregnant and being quietly dismantled by the people who were supposed to love her and who still had the clarity to think, document this. Trust what you know. Don't let it disappear. I think about cause and effect a lot now. Not in a cosmic sense, not in the way people talk about karma or the universe balancing its books. I mean it in the plainest, most practical way. What we do tends to become what we get. Patricia had spent years practicing a particular way of moving through the world, calculating, controlling, treating people as variables to be managed. That practice didn't fail her the night she put something in my tea. It had been failing her for a long time before that. It had failed her son into a man who couldn't stand up for his wife. It had failed her into a courtroom. It had failed her into the kind of record that follows a person's name forever. She got exactly what her choices built. That is not justice handed down from somewhere above. It is just arithmetic. And I think about my own arithmetic. I was not a hero in this story. I want to be honest about that. I stayed too long in situations that felt off. I let my husband's comfort matter more than my own instincts, more than once. There were weeks where I chose the path of least conflict and told myself it was grace, when really it was fear. I don't think that makes me weak. I think it makes me human. But I also think the turning point, the thing that actually changed the outcome, was not some sudden burst of bravery. It was a decision made quietly on an ordinary evening to start keeping records, to treat my own experience as evidence worth preserving. That is not dramatic. It is just integrity applied to yourself, the understanding that what is true deserves to be protected, even when you are the only one protecting it. What I learned from all of it is this. There is a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like strength when you're in it. It feels like stubbornness or paranoia or excessive caution. It feels like being the only person in the room who thinks something is wrong, but doing the right thing, telling the truth, building the documentation, trusting your own read of a situation. Those things compound the same way interest compounds. Slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. My daughter is 2 years old. She does not know any of the story. Someday, maybe, some version of it. But right now what she knows is that her mother shows up, that the apartment is warm, that the blocks get stacked and the towers fall and we build them again. That is what I want her to learn from me, not that life is spare, not that good people are always protected, but that you can be someone who pays attention, who tells the truth, who keeps going anyway. That those three things together are enough to build something real. The chamomile tea is on my list of things I no longer order. Everything else I kept,